The 1990s were a decade where Hollywood thrived. It was inarguably the decade that witnessed some of cinema's finest filmmakers such as Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese, Clint Eastwood, the Coen brothers, and James Cameron, to name a few, doing some of their career best work. The 90s also introduced Quentin Tarantino to American cinema. The film world was never to be the same again after Pulp Fiction, The Shawshank Redemption, and Forrest Gump. It was in all a decade of great films, innovations, a wild ride, and art on the big screen, with many of the films set to become among the finest ever made. I'm Devesh, and today on my channel Sele Cinema, I'm going to talk about a film that released on this date exactly 25 years ago. A film which many regard to be as the finest film of that decade, and some like me would even go so far as to call it as the finest film ever made. A towering achievement and a work of extraordinary art, it was made by a filmmaker prone to a lot of flamboyance and style, and from whom subtlety is not something you'd usually come to expect. But with this film, however, he moved on to uncharted territory, choosing to throw away all his usual tricks as a filmmaker to make a brutally honest and powerful film. The film went on to sweep the 66th Academy Awards, winning 7 Oscars for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Original Score, Best Film Editing, Best Cinematography, and Best Art Direction. In 2004, the US Library of Congress deemed the film to be culturally significant and selected it for preservation in the National Film Registry. Today, on the occasion of its 25th anniversary, I'm going to review the film Schindler's List.
You want these people?
My people. I want my people.
Who are you, Moses?
They say your factory is a haven. They say you are good.
There are an endless amount of films that talk about the horrors of the Holocaust, but Schindler's List is often the first movie that comes to mind, to the point that it is almost a cliche. Make no mistake though, Steven Spielberg's haunting take on the true story of the murder of European Jews earns its place right at the top, because unlike any other Holocaust film, you're made to actually feel the magnitude of millions of innocent lives, including children being obliterated from existence. It's a film that pulls no punches, where the nightmarish imagery is out front and center. Nothing is implied or shied away from. We see it all because we need to. But while most films about the Holocaust focus on the tortured Jewish people, Schindler's List is about Oskar Schindler, who before the war was a hard-drinking, womanizing wastrel and known as the playboy of the Eastern world. After the war, he was essentially a failure, both in business and in marriage. But during the Holocaust, a mysterious grace fell upon him, and he bravely and cleverly schemed to save the Jews working in his factory from the Nazi death camps. Oskar Schindler, however, was not your typical hero. He's a man of many flaws, an opportunist who unapologetically uses the war to get money, a corrupt businessman, and an adulterous husband. He could have been any of us, an ordinary human, finding his humanity under adverse conditions. All these nuances are well captured by Liam Neeson in what is a career best role. There is genuine emotion in his eyes as we see the horrors of the Holocaust unfolding through his eyes. More than a decade before he became known for playing the evil Lord Voldemort in the Harry Potter film series, Ralph Fiennes personified evil with his chilling portrayal of the real-life Nazi officer Amon Goeth. The sadistic Goeth randomly shoots camp internees for no reason in a horrifying depiction of Nazi excesses. What makes him all the more scary is the way he is depicted through the eyes of the Jews living under constant fear at the concentration camp, not knowing just what might set him off. Ralph nails the role and immerses himself into his character, giving us one of cinema's greatest villains. In fact, legend states that when Holocaust survivor Mela Pfefferberg, who is also depicted in this movie, met Ralph Fiennes on the sets of Schindler's List, she began shaking uncontrollably as he reminded her too much of the real Amon Goeth. Ben Kingsley as Itzhak Stern and Oskar Schindler's closest confidant is the quiet conscience of the film. Ben plays him as a proud and determined man with a mission and a palpable desperation to help all those he can. These traits are absent in Schindler until late into the film. Right from the onset, Itzhak recognizes Schindler's callousness and greed, but he is also acutely aware that the man is capable of doing good. It is therefore left up to Itzhak to tap into Schindler's better side and bring out the best version of him. It would be blasphemous of me not to talk about certain sequences in the film, be it one of the most terrifying sequences in the history of cinema, showing a train full of women and children being stripped naked and taken to a gas chamber. The Krakow liquidation scene, or the gut-wrenching immolation scene that will leave you feeling angry and depressed in equal measure. Perhaps it is the live images of humanity dying in front of my eyes, or the painful knowledge that all this actually happened, but I couldn't help the tears rolling out of my eyes. I'm not the crying type, especially while watching films. I do get emotional, but this was one of the rare occasions when I couldn't help shedding buckets of tears in desperation and in anguish. This emotion held on for the full 3 hours and 15 minutes that the movie played and left me feeling distraught. Despite the clear restraint, Spielberg does show flashes of his usual genius by portraying various visual motifs, creating a movie that has more to it than what meets the eye. In a brilliant stroke of touch, the movie was shot almost entirely in black and white, which contributes to the narrative, and the lack of color clearly portrays the Holocaust as devoid of humanity and life. Another masterstroke was the presence of the girl in the red coat, the only bit of color that is shown in the movie. Schindler sees her trying to hide from the Nazi guards during the Krakow liquidation. Much later, he sees the same red coat amongst a sea of dead bodies, realizing that the girl had died, and thus setting the course for Schindler's eventual redemption. There can be many interpretations as to what the girl in the red coat represented, but the most potent one would be that it represented the ignorance of the US government to the Holocaust during the war. It was as obvious as the girl in the red coat, yet they chose not to do anything about it. Another use of symbolism in the film is in one of the most rattling scenes where the Jews are loaded onto cattle carts and are forced to leave behind their luggage on the platform, which was to follow them on a different train. The luggage is never loaded onto a train but is instead dumped in a room. Here, the pile of luggages symbolizes not just the millions of lives lost, but also the Jews being stripped of their very identity. The Academy Award-winning musical score by John Williams not only complements the overall feel, but also does an incredible job in capturing the horror of the Holocaust while keeping the hope in humanity alive. The film's main theme, played with such passion and emotional intensity by the great violinist Itzhak Perlman, is heartbreakingly simple and touching. Perhaps there's no other film that has the same kind of devastating impact that Schindler's List has. As depressing as it is though, Schindler's List is, in the end, a hopeful story. It's a call to average people like ourselves that no matter who we are or where we come from, there's always hope for redemption and a chance to do something that's actually important, something that's right and good. Above all, it's a film that speaks about the triumph of the human spirit in the face of adversity. I'm going with 5 out of 5 for Schindler's List.
The list is life.